Welcome back to the channel. My name is Kari Woolf, and today I want to talk about something I'm calling the comfort of the familiar, which is the cyclical nature of life, of storytelling, and cyclical structures we use to make sense of our existence and to enjoy stories, essentially, if whether they're on TV or movies or my favorite, the written stories. So I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the concept of, repetitive plot structures, or maybe a better way of putting it is common plot structures. Some people say there's only one plot structure. Some people say there's like three or four, maybe as many as seven. There's different numbers and variations, but essentially the idea is that any story that is told in any culture across any time shares some common themes. And this is because this is how humans make sense of the world and our lives. And whether you want to call it the hero's journey, like Joseph Campbell does, or the heroine's journey, if you're into like a more feminine take on that familiar idea, it's essentially that the hero, the protagonist, the main character of the story goes forth on a cycle of personal development that transforms not only him or her, but the wider world. And that is the story arc that most people enjoy seeing, reading, experiencing, and maybe even identifying in their own life, which is, after all, why we enjoy stories so much. We're looking for that thread of the familiar or maybe the aspirational, but it has some tether to our own lives, and that's what makes it compelling. When I was doing some research for my forthcoming fiction, I was recommended to check out this book by Christopher Vogler, The Writer's Journey, Mythic Structure for Writers. I'll kind of stick it up here so you can see it a little bit better. And you can see it's like super well tabbed. I really enjoyed this book. And what I liked about it is he goes through film and books to identify these kinds of themes and transformations. And there's some useful tips for writers in here. Although I think the best advice I was given is to read this all the way through and then forget about it, because your story is not supposed to be formulaic. It's meant to be inspired, and you touch on the themes, but you subvert them where you need to. And there's all kinds of nuance and fun. But what I liked about the wider scope of the different genres he looked at and things is you really got to see how universal some of these concepts are. And why does that matter? Well, I think that we're in a time that when people are enjoying nostalgia, this has been going on for some time. Perhaps we always have. That's why there's only so many story types, and we're always essentially kind of retelling the same story. But many of us right now see this in a shorter term time horizon. There's lots of remakes of films that weren't even made that long ago. My local cinema here where I live is hoping to sell tickets by making the experience not about going to see new films necessarily, but by showcasing favorite old films that people can go and experience, in the beautiful cinema setting with the people bringing you popcorn and drinks and all the things. And your phone has to be off, and the dog isn't going to jump on you, and your kids aren't going to wake up and need a drink, or the things that make going to the cinema more special than being at home, where obviously it's more comfortable and easy and low friction to experience storytelling. So to help people get over that friction, they are banking on the fact that we want to see stories we already know and trust are good. We're craving, I think, in this moment, the familiar, the recognizable, the things that we know we are going to like. And that ties in with this greater idea that we're always telling the same story in one way or another. And that's not only through the mediums of art and literature and film, but in history. There's always discussions of cycles of history. If you're into astrology, there's astrological cycles, and every time a planet enters a new astrological sign, that those transits are discussed in their cyclical terms. So the last time Pluto was in Aquarius, this is what was going on the planet, and we are looking for recurrent themes. And if you are into any kind of healing work, you're probably familiar with the concept of the spiral. So you go through life spiraling over the same lessons again and again, hopefully learning them in less dramatic, earth-shattering ways each time you go through them, and maybe you're ascending as you go up. So you're learning more, but you're not really breaking too far outside of the spiral of this experience. And it's actually that repetitive nature, the rhythmic nature of it, that gives the healing its power, that really makes it stay in the psyche. If you've studied certain yogic practices, or you are a practitioner of the rosary or other types of prayers that you say on a daily basis, or more frequently than that, several times a day, and it's the same words, the idea is similar, that you are repeating something that by nature of the repetition, it gets into your subconscious and changes the response mechanisms of your brain, changes the way the chemicals flow through your body, because you have altered something internal simply by repeating the same words again and again. It's a formula, it's a pattern, and it evokes change. People reciting epic poetry or epic stories again and again, as you're either reciting it or you're listening to it, you are maybe experiencing the same thing. You hear the story again and again, and it gets into the psyche, and perhaps as the hero is transformed, so are you. That's what makes stories so compelling after all. So what's the point of repeating the same story again and again? Yes, maybe there is a familiarity that and an association that builds, and then, as I suggested, there's some sort of transformation in yourself. Beyond this, if we're thinking beyond just the scope of what a story does for us personally, it can give a sense of cohesion to a group of people. It can give a sense of purpose, shared meaning, shared identity. This is why, in America, where I was born, the stories of the founding fathers, which I certainly felt like I studied again and again, year on year throughout my schooling. It gives a foundational identity to the people living there, who may have come from different cultures. Is one of the things that makes America so unique. People come with all kinds of different backgrounds, come together, and we're told, oh, the country was founded in this way, and these are the stories, and this is how it happened. And we hear them again and again, and it's supposed to give some sort of shared identity or shared messaging about what the place we're living in means. And in Europe, where I live now, of course, there's stories that go back far further than the stories of the founding fathers, which are in recorded memory. There are stories here that are so ancient and so specific to particular regions of England, tiny towns. And it's the same, throughout the oldest parts of the world, where people have been living for a really long time. These stories bring people together and help them to live in community, help them to reinforce their values, and hopefully live in a loving, harmonious way. And this is another reason why we prize stories and storytelling so much. It's not just a way to pass the dark hours of the winter, or to idle away evenings when the work is done. It is very much a social activity. Reading is solitary. You can certainly read aloud. I read aloud to my children every night, but you mostly, as an adult, read by yourself, and you're kind of in your own world. But if you're reading something that everyone else is enjoying or sharing in, really the project is much bigger than yourself. So what other types of stories are told repetitively and seasonally and frequently, maybe with a meaning that is subtle, maybe with a meaning that is like pretty pointed? I think of family stories. So we all have the myths and legends of our own families, like the family joke, the crazy thing that Uncle Joe did, or I can certainly think of some in my family. I won't embarrass anyone by saying them, but these stories become bigger than the moment that they describe, because they make the members of our own family into characters, and sometimes caricatures and archetypes. and it helps explicate the family dynamic, also define it, and it gives people roles that perhaps they're not always happy with, and part of their own maybe hero's journey in their own life is to break out of the archetype of like the black sheep or the messy one or the one who always gets lost or is always late or does this, that, or whatever. But it also, runs a line of humor and familiarity through family lines. It's very similar to the reasons why we tell stories in like a community-wide setting. It gives everyone their place, and you can see how traits filter down through family lines, and how Uncle Joe is really like his nephew, who's also like the nephew's grandfather, and the common family line stuff that we like to trace through because it gives a sense of continuity. And continuity, going back to the comfort point, is a comfort in times of great change. And history is often described as the story of continuity and change. So we look for what stays familiar while we acknowledge all that is changing and in flux. And that gives us a point of comfort, something sweet, something lasting, stabilizing, grounding that we can hold on to, even while everything around us disintegrates or transforms or changes. So while it's easy to be skeptical or maybe a bit disdainful of some of the recent remakes, I'm particularly thinking of the Mean Girls remake because it was just so recent, and they've already remade it. But it's easy to be disdainful of that, but actually there's good reason why people do this, and they latch onto the familiar, and they're looking to maybe even add a new layer to something that has gone before. There's a book I love called The Leopard. It is by an Italian author, and it's about the Italian unification movement. It's told from the perspective of a fading aristocrat in Sicily, and it's about the wave of change coming through Italy. And suddenly, people who weren't wealthy are wealthy, and people who were wealthy aren't wealthy, and there's a sense of everything changing. And there's so much in there that's relevant to this point. But in terms of the point of reflecting back on stories and what different layers of repetition and review can give us, there's this really interesting moment where at the end of the book, a few of the characters are now very old, and they're reflecting back on a failed love affair that happened, 50 years earlier, 50, 60 years earlier. And the story has been told throughout the book from kind of the female character's point of view. And then these two other characters come in and they kind of give their points of view. Oh, remember when? Yes, he really did, care about you. And then this other character then privately says, well, what are you talking about? No, he didn't. And you have all these different perspectives. And the author really draws out the point that the truth is something that none of us can really know. Everyone is kind of throwing their layer of dirt over it. They have to bring in kind of the mafia reference, I guess, like the buried body of the truth. And everyone's saying, well, I think it was like this, and I think it was like that. And recycling and reviewing the same story, telling it from a different standpoint. Maybe it buries the truth, or maybe it's the opposite, and it's almost like you're excavating the body and you're getting a better glimpse of what reality is underneath. This is really what I was playing with when I very purposely evoked a repetitive storytelling cycle in my memoir. So I was given a quote by my editor right as I was wrapping up my memoir. It's by an academic called Ellen Dissanayake, and I put it actually in like the opening of my memoir here. Rhythm is the inevitable result of repetition. I love this so much, and my editor pointed this out to me because she really felt like there was something rhythmic, which to me suggests, grounding and stabilizing and calling to attention and really bringing into the zone, to put it really beautifully, about telling the same story again and again. When I was trying to make sense of my own life, this is the exercise of memoir so often, or it's to reveal what has been made clear, perhaps in someone's life. I wanted to do that from the perspective of different people in my life, my lives. I've lived many already, clearly. And by showing a glimpse of something that had happened from first one person's perspective and then another, and then in this moment of time, and then again a year later, reflecting back, you see different aspects of the experience. And what's so fascinating to those of us who, are introspective and pay a great deal to of attention to the interiority of our lives is how differently you can view the same event, the same thing that's happened to you in the moment, and then after a passage of time, or maybe it's not even time necessarily. It's like experience coded after certain things have happened to you. It really alters your memory and your perspective and your understanding of what your life was about, and something that happened to you, what it really meant. Certainly for me, one of the greatest lessons of motherhood has been that as powerful as the human mind is, and as inventive and creative as we can be, ultimately meaning is something that eludes us. I think, at least in imperfect understanding. We'll never perfectly understand something, but it's fascinating, it's growth producing, it is community building, it is, I think, love enhancing, not to ruminate and to stagnate over a story, but to consider things to take your life seriously, and to consider the big moments from a few different angles, not to make up your mind about something initially and stick with that, but to remain open to review, to give yourself the gift of a flexible, supple mind that can go back over something and glean more information and understand something in a different way. And hopefully this enhances your compassion and your ability to relate not only to yourself and to your own life, but to greater humanity, to other people. And in this way, you can realize that even though your life is so specific and so filtered and channeled in many ways, actually the entirety of the human experience is contained within it. And it can allow you, if you allow this concept into your being, to relate to people open-heartedly, with compassion, and actually with true empathy, because you can see the things that have happened to you in your own life in so many different ways. And you don't have to write down your own story to, arrive at such insights, but going back over stories that are familiar to you from time to time is also a useful exercise. It's one of the reasons this year I'm spending time rereading books that I read a long time ago and I haven't revisited. I'm going to be very interested to see how I relate to them. I've already done some of this exercise with my children, which I thought was going to be the definition of comfort, the familiar, the comfort of the familiar. I really thought that was going to be about finding comfort in old stories and having a warm, nostalgic experience. And in some cases it has. I'm reading Brian Jacques' Redwall to my kids right now, and they love it, and it's so well written, and I'm enjoying it too. There have been some other things I've revisited that have been less successful, and it's been really interesting for me to reflect back and think, like, why did I like this? Or did I like this? Was I just given it? You don't want to spend your whole life inside your own thoughts too much, but I do think that there's a great deal of utility actually to reviewing old things sometimes. And I say this perhaps especially because we are constantly being fed new things, both through human endeavor and now with AI. The proliferation of new content, new information, new everything is omnipresent, and it seems like there is just like an endless flow of new, and that's exciting and it's fun. But actually, I'm not sure it can ever replace some of the great weighty milestones of our own life that are both experienced, but actually also experienced through art, literature, the stories that really moved us. So I'm also here to make a case for reviewing some old favorites and really being comforted by the familiar, or finding that you're not comforted by it and perhaps gaining a little bit of insight into the difference between you then and you now and maybe what that means. So through cyclical storytelling, through whether it's repeating the same family story every time you all get together, going to the cinema to see like Back to the Future, or this time of year, I always think Lord of the Rings is popular, whatever you're into, like whatever old favorite motivates you to buy a ticket, drive out in the cold, and go and sit and see something on the big screen. Whether you're rereading a classic, you have the opportunity to comfort yourself in a way that I think does matter and is totally appropriate and is just like a warm, cozy blanket in the still cold, cold winter nights, or you're simply re-examining your own life. I hope that you do find comfort in something familiar. I hope that you spend some time deep in stories in a time that is very distracting. I am certainly finding it very distracting and very loud. And I'm finding the familiar not like a comfort in a numbing, infantile, regressive sort of way, but in a sturdy, stabilizing, grounding, going back to something that mattered to me once and still matters to me, that kind of way. And that's been really good for me. I hope it's really good for you as well. And if you're interested in the way I've done this, in the story of my own life, which is, very much a heroine's journey. That's how I experienced it anyway. You can find my memoir, No Prayer More Powerful, wherever books are sold. There's a link in my bio as well. I've mentioned some other really great books on this video. Giuseppe Lampedusa's The Leopard. Maybe spend a little bit less time with the new and a little bit more time with the old, and see how that hits you. I'd love to know. That's it for me today. I will be back with another video next week. If you have enjoyed the show, please subscribe and like. If you're listening on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, it would be great if you could leave a review. That really helps more people find the show. I will catch you again very soon.